dates and determine whether the language was in those templates at the time, we should be able to bucket those by September.
Okay, that would be very helpful, because I think we need to know what the risk is to the workers. I presume, I understand, and you can clarify, confirm this or say that whether I'm wrong. Any future agreements with any JPAs will have successor liability agreements in them?
That is our intention, yes.
That's your intention. Is
yes.
Has that been happening?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
We'll have that, as well as additional filters on the front end for financial viability of a JPA or any other public employer. That might be the definition through Gate 1 of what a public employer is defined as, but we're also putting in the financial viability. Do you have a revenue source that's predictable and reliable?
Okay, good. Just make sure we get that information in September. Senator Morlock, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm real curious about TAP. So right now, if a participant, a plan sponsor, wants to exit CalPERS, they have two choices. One is TAP and the other is Loyalton. And they just stop paying and you just cut the benefits for the... but that's sort of an informal policy. That's kind of new territory. So how long has TAP been around?
When we looked, the TAP's been around, I think we've had terminated agencies since, I think, back to 1970s, in the early 70s. So it's been around for 30, 40 years. And like I said, most of the plans that have been terminating have supplied the necessary contributions needed to terminate. East San Gabriel was I think, one of the first significant involuntary terminations that we had. All the other plans, even Loyalton was kind of unique because they actually terminated the plan and then didn't have the money to terminate it. So they had the numbers, and then they kind of were going through the process, and then for some reason they went through all the process and then said, oh, we can't pay it at the end. And at that point, our hands were tied because everything was committed up to that point. They had signed all the papers. They had basically signed the contract terminating the plan. And so Loyalton was a situation.
So maybe not to get into the weeds too much, I apologize. But you decided somewhere along the way that if someone wanted to terminate, there's this procedure.
Correct.
And so you have this rather onerous requirement to come up with a big chunk of money if you want to terminate. And so my curiosity is, you're supposed to be a service provider. You are to invest the funds and pay the beneficiaries. And somehow you've become more of a lobster trap that if a city uses you, they can't get out because the price is so expensive. And I'm kind of wondering, where did that start? Where, that you don't see that private sector. If I want to leave, we find out what our balance is, and we say thank you very much, and we go to the next agency or business that provides the same service, invests and pays beneficiaries. And I'm trying to get to the genesis of how we make this so difficult when someone's already in a rather traumatic financial distress.
So let me see if I can get at that. So the pension benefit has to be paid by someone, right? So it's either paid by the contributions or it's paid by investment earnings. In order for a member to receive that benefit over their lifetime, there is a payment that's required to have that.
I've sat on a retirement board for 12 years. I know how a DB plan works.
Right. So when someone moves into the terminated agency pool, we have to anticipate that the funds to pay those benefits over the lifetime, that we have some guarantee that those are going to come in appropriately. Without having that money come in, someone else will pay. It will be either socialized across the system, or someone will pay for that benefit eventually. We don't.
Well, the payer is supposed to be the plan sponsor, not CalPERS. It's the plan sponsor.
It's the employer.
So I'm wondering, how come you feel the obligation to be like a mother to the city and say, okay, we're going to figure out how to pay your beneficiaries? And, I guess where I'm getting to, Marcia, if I can be informal, is okay, I'm a city and I want to change. I could be 37 Act, if I were a county, I have options. And I say, okay, I've put in this much money into the plan, like you asked me to. Every year you asked me to pay in so much. You determine the amount through your actuaries, and I did that. And then you've been paying out to my beneficiaries, my former employees, And you've been really good about that, and they're getting their payments. So we've got annual audited financial statements. So we got it documented, how much we paid in, how much is paid out, and how much you've earned on my portion, because it's all shared. And so I know what my balance is at the end of the day, because it's all audited. And I'm saying, why don't you just give that balance to the plan sponsor and you cut it clean? So you have no responsibility for the exiting tenant. They're gone. None of my other 3,000 tenants have to worry about it. Yeah. It's over. It's like your son moving out of the house. It's like, thank you, goodbye, don't come back, or whatever, and it's all clean. But this tap is forcing Loyaltons to finally say, we don't want to do tap. We want to get out, and we are the plan sponsor. So you'll reduce the benefit because you feel like you're the mother, and at my terms.
Yeah, it's okay.
And then as the city, I will pay the delta.
Yeah.
I'll make sure my retirees aren't penalized.
Right.
But the decision to pay the delta is much cheaper and much more manageable than having to pay the tap. And I'm just trying to figure out where the mentality or because this could be so easy, but it seems so difficult. Is that fair to ask, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, so the current policy structure, the statutory framework around the TAP, is really intended to do what Scott just explained. City of Loyalton did, I think, get a bit creative. So what they had already paid sustained the current benefit levels that those retirees were receiving, and then they decided to terminate without paying. And then for the time being, not sure how long that arrangement may last. I mean, I think that would be the concern of the members, is that this could be a temporary arrangement, and what happens 20 years out? Is that commitment still there if a new city council were to come in? So I think that is an option for cities, counties, participating employers to do. I think it would be great if that were to happen, so the member isn't impacted at the end of their career when they have very limited options of being able to return to work and make up that difference. But it's the current policy construct. But again, even with that policy construct, you can still have the creativity, I think, that City of Loyalton did in this case.
Because Loyalton could even buy a private annuity cheaper than what you're asking for a TAP. And so it seems to me your life would be easier, a lot easier, to eliminate TAP and just say, okay, to the city, you want out, you're out. But you're responsible. You're the plan sponsor. It's your retirement plan. All we're doing is doing a great job of investing. I mean, you're within the benchmarks, and you're doing a great job of administering. I don't have retirees complaining about they're not getting their payments on time or whatever.
Right.
But if the city says, boy, for whatever reason, we've got to try something different through this difficult, stressful period, it seems to me you would both have easier lives if you just said, cut it, right? Just cut it. Because right now you're creating turmoil. You got LA Works, and you got all these people that are struggling, trying to figure it out. But the agencies and the residents of those agencies are responsible for those payments. That's a debt that they're responsible for. You almost put, restrictions on their titles of their properties. I mean, you could put deed restrictions, say, hey, this is a debt you have to these people that work for you while you were residing here. That's just what I would recommend, that you think that through a little bit as a board to make it. Because we're all the city is responsible. Who your plan sponsor is responsible for their. And so I think I made my point, but I just feel like you're making it too onerous for options.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dell, you had a question? No?
Pardon me?
No, Assemblymember Daly. So I just have one question. What legal, legislative, or regulatory authority does CalPERS have to audit an agency that wants to contract with the system before approving a contract?
So we have a criteria that we follow and a questionnaire that we use to help determine whether or not an entity qualifies as a public agency. And so we're basically following provisions of the Pearl. I think your question is what legal, regulatory? I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Was there a legal, legislative, or regulatory authority does CalPERS have to audit an agency that wants a contract with the system before approving a contract? Is there any options?
Yeah, I would say we have sufficient authority to do that. So we could audit at the time that a system made application. We could audit financial statements to to determine whether there was, a predictable, reliable income source for this long-term relationship. So we would have that authority today.
Okay, great. Member Cooley, do you have any other questions? So with that, I think the notice is important because many individuals who don't work in the county or finance departments of their contracting employer have no idea what's going on financially with their employer. In all fairness, they should make aware of the risk going on and then at retirement. So with that, we don't have any other questions. So I want to thank you for bringing forward your presentation. And we will now next hear from the employers contracting with CalPERS, starting with Mr. Hutchins from the League of Cities. Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. The responsibility of the cities in relation to ensuring that they are financially protecting promised retirement benefits to employees and retirees when contracting CalPERS. The city's role regarding contracts with CalPERS when they create a JPA and that entity subsequently finds itself in a financially unsustainable situation, and the employment and retirement benefits of employees and retirees are in jeopardy. And we just want to look at your role and go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Dane Hutchings. I'm with the League of California Cities, and it is my pleasure to speak with you today. I look forward to participating in an open and productive dialogue regarding some of the challenges we as employers face, not only for today's hearing, but should there be any subsequent legislation, we'd like to be a part of that on the front end. Over the past year, I've spent a significant amount of time traveling up and down the state of California, meeting with hundreds of city officials, and I have heard from regions north, south, and central, both coastal and inland, urban and rural cities, that the pension challenges we face do not have a regional or party preference. They are, in fact, the number one issue facing my members in the coming decade. And although today's topic of the hearing is specific to contracts with employers, there's no doubt that the challenges we face today directly relate to the stressed state of the pension fund. And as you know, as CalPERS mentioned in their testimony, the current status of the fund is 65% funded, meaning they essentially have 65 cents for every $1 promised to their employees. CalPERS is funded through employer and employee contributions and investment earnings, and so when market returns are down, employers make up the difference. A significant challenge and something that has really put things on high alert for my members is fiscal year 15 and 16, when CalPERS posted a 0.61 rate of return, missing their target of 7.5%. The board took some corrective action and lowered its discount rate from 7.5% to 7%. And the assumed rate of return automatically drives up the employer costs for our cities. And while the state has the ability to borrow a significant amount of $6 billion to future pay, our cities do not have the same luxury. And according to a recent CalPERS circular letter, there is a 15% increase or as much as a 25% increase in normal costs for public safety employees, a 15% increase in normal costs for miscellaneous employees, meaning you have to try and accommodate hiring and honoring benefits when you have significant amount of your total annual payroll reduced. Moreover, miscellaneous public safety and miscellaneous and public safety employees' unfunded liabilities are going to projected to be skyrocketing anywhere from 130% by fiscal year 24-25, and that is assuming that CalPERS can continue to hit their targets. Simply put, these numbers are unsustainable unless we can work together, the CalPERS, the state legislature, our employee partners, to immediately address the issues we face as more agencies will be pushed to the brink of insolvency. Now, regarding the formation of JPAs by government agencies vis-a-vis contracting with CalPERS, the League agrees that there needs to be more thorough vetting process by which agencies are screened prior to entering PERS. I'm sure we'll get into the details of LA Works a little bit later. Additionally, we would welcome the opportunity to work with stakeholders to allow agencies a more of a soft exit. I know it was alluded to up here in the previous testimony, but from my understanding and my members' understanding, Typically speaking, if an agency wishes to withdraw, they have to pay approximately 107% of their total liabilities up front. Today was the first time I had heard that agencies were able to sort of finance out. In fact, when we've asked that question to members of CalPERS staff, we were told that they're not a financer, so they don't finance unfunded liabilities. So we would very much support a structure that allows an agency, a distressed agency, to finance or soft exit out of the system to enable that there's no reduction in benefit. These are incredibly uncertain times for the state's pension system, and all stakeholders need to be willing to work together to make a difference and make the difficult decisions that will be needed in the upcoming years to ensure the sustainable future for our employees. With that, I am happy to answer any questions from the committee. Thank you.
You have a question, Senator Daly? Go ahead.
Well, more than a question, I have a comment. So I served 16 years on the Board of Supervisors up in Lassen County, and we had an unfunded pension liability that we were aware of that was obligated by previous boards. So and you're probably seeing this in every one of your city councils, most likely these pensions have been agreed, or salaries and benefits have been agreed on by somebody who doesn't sit there anymore. And so as legislators, or city council members, county boards of supervisors, you name it, whoever's in the position of actually securing the contracts for their employees is pushing off a liability, expecting the market to make the correction. So the one problem we have with CalPERS is that we set their return. We say you're going to get 7.5%. That doesn't happen in a 401k. A 401k goes up and down, and you're hoping that over the 30 years that you're working and you're putting into a 401k that it actually goes up and that you have good investments. So if what needs to really happen in all these scenarios is that employees need to understand that what you bargain for today, if it is not funded and we don't do a good job of investing those funds, that there's no there. So they come into my office every day in this building and want a COLA and want more benefits, which I'm saying we haven't even funded what you are promised to get. So at some point we have to have a marriage between business, because what really drives the economy and investments is private industry jobs, not public jobs. So they're the takers of that equation. I hope I'm not losing it, because this is a really deep subject that most employees that work for any agency don't even understand what's happened. They're just been told that when you retire, you're going to have all these things. And that's not the truth. In Lassen County, where I served, it took me 10 years of talking to my employees that if you don't address it now and actually put something away for those unfunded liabilities, you're not going to get it. And now it's come full forward. We had the dot-com boom, we had the housing boom, and our stock market was going crazy. And what did we do? We went out and we gave employees 3% at 50 for public safety. And, might be justified, but you still got to pay the bill. And we raised those pensions up without thinking that the stock market was going to continue to go. Well, what goes up will come down. And this is going to correct. When this economy corrects, what you're faced with is you've now been promised that it hasn't been 7.5, it's 0.061 or whatever the heck it is, which is horrible for the investment. Thank God. I mean, we can all talk about how bad Trump is, but at least the stock market's going in the right direction. They called the Trump up. Maybe not be, but it's moving in the right direction, which is helping you today. Well, if that corrects, that if we really get down to like 6%, so what happens is you have let me just give you an example of what happens. So you have a county sheriff. I'll just use them because they were our highest paid employee at the county I represented. He gets, back then you could work for 2 years and you got, for 30 years, your highest 2 years, you were paid your retirement. So if he worked 30 years as a jailer for $50,000 a year, and then he won an election and he got paid $165,000 a year, if he was in office for 1 year, he got $165,000 for his retirement at 3% of that at 50. So if he worked 25 years, he's getting 110% of his salary for the rest of his life. So he runs, he works a year, he retires, the next guy runs. Pretty soon you got 4 people that you're paying $500,000 for and 1 guy working.
Plus COLAs.
Plus COLAs. That's the problem that we have with all these agencies, around 4,000 of them out there. We got to stop already, and we need to say, look, we need to grow our economy, which is one thing, and we got to quit promising employees that they're going to get something that's not there, and educate them to the fact that it doesn't matter how many times you come to Sacramento and lobby for what you're getting today, because there is no tomorrow there. And once we get below 50%, it will death spiral, and we'll be talking about, not one of us will have a job here because they'll throw us all out. But these are tough times. Loyalton is in my district. And I've been talking about it for 10 years at our county. We actually funded ours. We actually took a pay cut, every one of us, along with our employees, to get where we were funded. So the point I'm trying to make is there's no there. And every one of you special districts out there are going to be faced with this problem until we start being honest with our employees and honest about the things we can afford and honest about our investments. Quite frankly, we're not getting 7.5%. We need to tell those employees, if you don't get 7.5%, and it is whatever it is, that's what your retirement is, because that's what the default is. That's what they did to Loyalton. They basically said, hey, Patsy, the lady that retired that's in my district up there, was getting $40,000 a year, and today she's 71 and she's getting $19,000. She was expecting to get 40. So we need to be honest with our employees, and we need to craft something that comes out of here that says, hey, if we don't hit our mark and we overpromise to you, Mr. or Mrs. Employee person, that it's not there, because where else are you going to get it? What's going to happen now is when you downgrade that to 7%, every one of your cities has to pay that bill. And they're not going to be able to pick up the garbage on the side of the street because they're paying for people who aren't working there anymore. Thanks for coming and telling me. I know your problem, but we got to talk about the solution. The solution is that we have to be honest with our employees and tell them, look, you've been promised something that's not there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Morlock, you had a question? Go ahead.
Just an inquiry, because we've talked about Loyalton, and certainly it's personal to the assembly member. But when you're making your payments as cities to CalPERS, their actuary computes the payment and you pay it. And so now we're reducing the investment assumption rate, and now contributions are going up. Maybe we should have done it, or CalPERS should have done it a little sooner, but that's just the way it is. But when you want to exit, they use a whole different discount rate.
Correct.
Could be like 2%.
I believe the TAP fund is it's either 4 or 2% is the discount rate that they apply to the TAP. So it is significantly different than what the PERF is currently set at.
So I'm trying to, like a layman, I'm looking at it and going, is that, I got to be careful here, but it almost, to me, seems like that could be fraud. That they have been undercharging you all along, because if you want to get out, it's 2%, but while you're in, it's 7.5%. And I'm just wondering if maybe your cities as consumers need to educate the board of CalPERS a little bit about, hey, you got to be consistent. It should be no worse or no better while I'm in or when I'm going out.
Yes.
Am I fair in?
Absolutely, Senator. When you look at the TAP fund and the fact that it is superfunded at 248%, you look at their asset allocations and what it's an incredibly conservative investment. And while you wouldn't yield a higher benefit amount, it is a much more stable benefit amount, which is why they put those terminated agencies in that pool. The PERF, the fund that we are all contributing to and drawing off of when we retire as a non-terminated agency, to try and meet the benefit promise. And because of some judicial cases regarding vested rights, the fund is a little bit more aggressive in their asset allocation, and it's quite frankly, as Mr. Tarando alluded to, it's a significantly larger fund, and so it's much more complicated than what I'm articulating. But a more realistic outcome is when you look at the TAP and look how the fact it's super funded. You take a look at that in comparison to what we have right now, and it is quite shocking. I was shocked to learn that the fund for terminated agencies was at 248%. And now, regarding the way we communicate with this, this is all uncharted territory for our cities. And, as I said, I have spent, significant amount of my time briefing hundreds of our city officials across California, and they're really at a loss because, as Assemblymember Dali mentioned, yes, these were benefits that were promised from councils, of previous times, and so they're new to this and just trying to figure out, what's going on. We are actively working as the League of California Cities to ensure that our city officials are educated, and we are trying the best we can to continue to educate them as to the challenges that we are facing. But because of the benefit promise and vested rights, we can tell them what's happening, but as of now, we can't, without a legislative solution or a judicial remedy, we really can't do anything to modify benefits on a prospective basis. So as we've talked about, when you agree into when you enter an agreement to CalPERS with your employees, it's a 30-year to 40-year benefit promise based on market assumptions today. So again, it is a significant challenge. I don't think that anyone in this room anticipated the market crash of 2008. No one anticipated CalPERS would lose $67 billion in 1 year. Again, which is why these decisions are so difficult and why my members are ready and willing to be an active participant to see if we can do something to address these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Two questions. First one, what considerations are contemplated by cities when creating a JPA? And do any of these considerations include the financial solvency of the JPA?
Sure. Happy to answer that. So the best of my knowledge, and I've sort of used this, and I certainly don't mean to make light of the situation, but I'm not the League of California Joint Powers Authority, so excuse me if I'm not very versed in JPA law. But from talking to my members, there are thousands of JPAs created all over the state of California, including partnering with the state of California, the counties, special districts, to provide services that stream beyond the city limits. Now, to the best of my understanding, specific to LA Works, at the time when the cities entered into this JPA, there was no employee transfers from those cities to this JPA. This was a new governing body established, a new JPA created with no employees, simply a mechanism to require grant funding. So I can't speak to any individual city specifically with regard to the considerations they take. I do know that that JPAs are, in theory, designed to provide services by pooling resources and giving those services region-wide beyond city limits.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchings, on Sunday, the Newport Beach, Laguna Beach Daily Pilot, which is a subsidiary of the LA Times, it's on their website, did an article about 5 cities in Orange County and how they're trying to deal with this ever-growing pension problem, and their solution is, hey, let's pay more. Let's just try and pay down this unfunded liability and start making contributions like we should.
Right.
But not all can do that, and my cities are scrambling to figure out, even how to make the payment, but then try to find a little extra. So that was 5 cities. It was Fountain Valley, Costa Mesa, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, all trying to chip in a little more. I'm just curious, how many of your member cities are taking similar approaches?
I don't have a specific figure for you. One of the things that we are encouraging our cities with regards to best practices is not only trying to prepay your unfunded liability, but the challenge, and even inherently with prepaying your unfunded liability, is when you prepay and during the, and Mr. Trando spoke about the ALM cycle, the asset allocation cycle, where they look at all the factors and they it's been determined that people live longer, and the market assumptions that the goalpost sort of gets moved because if you prepay a certain amount of money based on these actuarial assumptions, and then when the new ALM cycle comes out and says, wait, people are living longer, that means you owe more. That money that you prepay vanishes essentially. I mean, that's the way our cities see it. And so what we have been advising cities to do is establish a 115 trust where they can invest money into a trust account. And again, they have to have the money to invest, but instead of, necessarily prepaying directly, I think some cities, and I believe someone from one of the special districts will allude to this, their intent was to save up enough in a 115 trust to pay the entire amount to get out of CalPERS, because when you prepay a significant amount and those actuaries are changed, it's sort of like, well, thank you for the $6 million prepayment. You actually owe us $12 million because you're not completely out of the fund. And so we are advising our cities on a variety of best practices that fit within the confines of current law.
So has Section 115 been discussed earlier in this hearing? No. So maybe you should, that's an Internal Revenue Code Section 115 trust. Could you explain that?
Correct. And so a 115 trust is an option that a local agency can enter into that is established through the IRS that allows a local agency to contribute funds to a protected trust. It must be then applied to CalPERS eventually. It cannot be withdrawn for any other purposes, and I think there are some rare occasions in case of an emergency or something of that nature. But essentially, what you do is you take a budget surplus at the end of the year and you would throw into this 115 trust with the intent to pay down your unfunded liability. Now, some cities are using it as they call it a pension stabilization fund. So if the market jumps, or I'm sorry, if the market dips and rates go up, they've got some money in a pool here to sustain their level of funding. But other cities are using it that are cities or other localities that are a little bit more fiscally sound are saving up that money to then do one lump sum payment to exit out of the system because of the volatility with CalPERS.
So a city and a municipality, they don't pay income tax. So why would you need to have a Section 115 trust fund? What is the genesis of? And again, I'm not an actuary, and I'm not an accountant, but from the best of my understanding is these are protected trust funds that were dedicated to pay down your CalPERS liability. So you were able to throw money into a trust, which is then invested on and actually makes a market return. And so you can actually, through compounding and over time, you can grow that trust through investing. It isn't just putting the money under the mattress. You're actually investing those funds and making money out of that fund. And when you have that amount of money, you throw it over to your unfunded liabilities. So then, would you be able then to reflect it as an expense item on your budget? Is that what we're doing?
You can. Yes, you can.
As opposed to saying it's a cash.
Correct. It is an expense item on the budget. However, it is not reflected on the GASB report, and so that's one of the hiccups. But I think some cities are willing to take that hit, saying, well, our GASB unfunded liability is this much money, but we have this much set aside in a trust that must be dedicated to CalPERS. So they use that usually in a footnote of their report to offset that unfunded liability.
And what can you invest it in?
I wouldn't want to speak to that.
Okay, but so if it's just in a money market fund, you're not really making a lot of money then.
I know that. I do know that companies that establish those trusts have different levels of investment risk that you're willing to take. And
so there's a vendor market
yes.
out there to help you with your 115.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have one more question. What can cities do, if anything, to help minimize disruptions in contracts with CalPERS, and in particular when it involves creating a JPA that contracts with the system?
That's an excellent question. So, when cities establish their JPAs under the current government code section 6508.1, as you all know, gives within that language gives those local agencies, and again, we do these with the state as well, and county special districts, all of us. But when we activate that section of the government code, it does give the governing body the ability to either take on the liability or not take on the liability if that joint powers authority states so in their origination documents. I would imagine that it would not be in our best interest to enter into a JPA knowing we're going to have employees and then simply dissolve that JPA. Under current law, when the JPA was established in 1979, I don't know if that was taken into consideration as far as the growth of that JPA. I can tell you that our cities utilize JPAs. One of the examples I was given from one of my city managers with after SB1 and the allocation of these funds, you're going to have transportation projects that go across city lines and county lines, and so you need to establish some of these JPAs to administer these funds to fix our roads. So I would imagine that if there was, as CalPERS has suggested in their presentation about joint and several liability, it's something that we would definitely need to consider before entering a JPA on an ongoing basis at this point.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, members? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hutchings, you've already had 3 members that have filed for Chapter 9, and one just kind of got out of it just the last week or two, or out of bankruptcy court anyway. But cities are required to file a notice of financial distress if they want to consider filing for Chapter 9. I'm just wondering, not naming any names, but are cities coming to you saying, "Hey, we are this close. We are really having a tough time making it work"?
When Senator, without naming specific names, there are members out there of mine that when they look at the next 5 to 7 years, seeing their employer contributions quadruple, their unfunded liabilities quintuple, they do not see a way out. I have one city in particular who has stated that in the next 5 years, based on market assumptions and what they had been told from CalPERS what they're going to have to pay, the option is to either file for bankruptcy or close down the library, eliminate 2 police beats, close down a fire station, eliminate their river cleanup, eliminate a significant amount of services, or file for bankruptcy. So this is something that we are very fearful of, that in the next 5 to 10 years, we believe there will be agencies that will have to file for bankruptcy and have to restructure their debt somehow.
The next panel deals with counties, and I was a county supervisor before coming here. And because of the VLF takeaway back in 2011 with SB 89 by Governor Brown, trailer bill, those 4 cities were looking at not bankruptcy, but disincorporating, because they had just incorporated in 2004. So how many of your members have discussed disincorporating?
To my knowledge,
as opposed to Chapter 9, because it might be cheaper. Just
correct. I have heard the bankruptcy, sort of the thoughts on bankruptcy, but I have yet to hear a city that's considering disincorporating at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's any other questions. Thank you, Ms. Hutchins, for your presentation. If you don't mind hanging out for a little bit in case there's any other questions. And with that, we'll go ahead and start with our next panel. Thank you. For our second panel, we'll hear from Ms. Johnson, legislative representative from the California Association of Counties, and Mr. Fox, Solano County Director of Human Resources. As they come to the presenter's table, I'd like to pose the same question to you as their perspective as counties. The responsibility of counties in relation to ensuring that they are financially protecting promised retirement benefits to employees and retirees when contracting with CalPERS, and also the county's role regarding contracts with CalPERS when a county subsequently finds itself in a financial insecure situation such that the employment and retirement benefits of employees and retirees are in jeopardy. This also includes jointly created by counties. So go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Dorothy Johnson with the California State Association of Counties. I will defer most of my time to Mr. Mark Fox with Solano County Director of Human Resources, but I do want to just share a quick overview that 37 of California's counties are in CalPERS. The others are actually 37 Act or have other independent retirement systems. So while we do not have our full counties as part of CalPERS, of course, we do know that as goes CalPERS, so goes many of the other retirement systems. So we really want to thank the joint committees for meeting today and the opportunity to speak. And with that, I'll turn it to Mr. Fox.
Thank you so much. My name is Mark Fox. I'm the Director of Human Resources for the County of Solano. And prior to that, I worked for 3 cities. Solano County is a CalPERS member. First, I'd like to give a couple of acknowledgments. The first is to the CalPERS staff and the Governor's Office. Within the county structure, despite the courts having been separated from the counties a number of years ago, the courts are still part of our actuarial valuations. And we've been working with administration and working with CalPERS so that the courts have their own separate actuarial valuation. That's important because today we're doing hand calculations for our CAFR, our Consolidated Annual Financial Reports, to remove those assets and those liabilities because they are not assets or liabilities of the county itself. And I'd like to thank the legislature, your 2 committees, and the CalPERS staff for their thoughtful and ongoing discussions related to the sustainability of the pension benefits themselves. The employer community does have a shared interest, along with the CalPERS members, the unions that represent them, and all the stakeholders, in maintaining the sustainability of the retirement system, the retirement benefits. As a Director of Human Resources, right, we employ individuals. Those individuals have an implied promise, a guaranteed promise, that when they work their career, whether it is as myself for a variety of cities and now a county, that those benefits will be there through the reciprocity agreements between those different entities and CalPERS. There are 2 concerns that as an individual human resources director that I share. One of those is with the current federal administration, whether or not changes in funding that fund health and welfare benefits will be sustainable over the long term to meet our current obligations that we have in terms of providing services and the kind of staffing models that we have today. If the federal government moves to block grant funding, then that will significantly require us as a county to revisit how we do our service delivery model. Today, it is very difficult for us to pay additional monies to CalPERS when we're reimbursed with those monies from federal dollars, because those then come from the county general fund and not through those federal dollars. The second area of concern is whether or not CalPERS has additional changes that they will be implementing over the short term or moderate term. The changes in mortality table, discount rate, and others appear as an individual to be short-term solutions. CalPERS has made public comments, or at least comments in public settings, that for the next number of years, they will not be achieving their 7% rate of return, which means as employers, we will have additional sustained losses. And if it is, in fact, temporary in nature, that additional changes are going to be coming, that would be helpful for the employer community so that we can plan. Solano County has made plans. We do conduct regular actuarial studies outside of the CalPERS system using a private actuarial to identify the long-term costs that we as the employer will be faced. We do try to anticipate these very large increases, have, for example, established a pension trust and a pension reserve. The pension trust is a 115 trust, and there are 3 distinct advantages in terms of Senator Morlock's earlier question. The first of those advantages is that we have an opportunity through the investment policy related to that trust to have a slightly better rate of return than through the general treasury. The second advantage of the trust is that we are able to show those assets through our CAFR, the Consolidated Annual Financial Report, as assets of the retirement plan itself, therefore slightly reducing the liability. Solano County, as the gentleman from the League of Cities indicated, we have been using primarily one-time funds to help to augment our trust and reserve, and have about $22 million that we've deposited over the last 4 years. And the third advantage, probably the most important advantage of those, is that once the monies are in a 115 trust, the governing board can't use those monies for something else. Can't use those monies for road repairs, can't use those monies for salary increases, can't use those monies for health insurance increases. But over the moderate term and over the short term, there are 2 incredible stressors in our budget. And those stressors are pension costs and health insurance costs. And it has been a difficult challenge as we move into labor negotiations to try and balance the expectations that employees have for continued wage increases to meet the changing economic environments that they live in, along with the employer responsibilities to be planning for both the future needs of the county, our infrastructure, our buildings, our people, and still meet our long-term obligations related to health insurance and pension liabilities. Hope that is interesting and helpful information as the two committees look to complete their work.
Yes, Senator Morlock, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fox, I'm curious, we're talking about medical and retiree, and those are all employee benefits. Does your county show its employees how much is being paid for all their benefits? So, because all they get is the net paycheck, right? But they get total compensation, which includes the contribution to the plan, the medical insurance and dental and others. So do you, on your pay stub or on their website for their payroll information, do you provide the total compensation?
We do it in two different fashions. So on my biweekly paycheck, it shows exactly what the county's costs are for those different benefits. And then as through the labor negotiation process, we share with each of the employee associations or unions the totality of our costs. So, for example, on the health insurance costs, we have about 3,000 employees in Solano County. We're paying approximately $34 million in health insurance costs and about $43 million in pension costs.
So as your pension costs go up, you could say, hey, you got a raise for 10% in total compensation, even though you didn't get any increase in your salary. But you still got a massive increase in your total compensation.
We do show the total employer costs and the growth of those, and that was part of the board's presentation during budget hearings as well, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Levin, do you have a question?
More of a statement, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I apologize. I'm a little late to the party. I was at a few other committees. My question really is about the successor language. I think this may have already been asked, but why would an employer not have successor language when they put together a JPA? I don't know if you guys are the appropriate ones to answer that.
I'm not the appropriate person. I'm an HR guy, not an attorney.
Okay, so then let me just say this. I think it's unconscionable what has happened with these JPAs that did not have successor language, and we have people that have been reduced, their pension's been reduced by 63%. So as Mr. Chair, as we move on, maybe someone can enlighten me, since like I said, a little late